Good afternoon, Midwest Mania guests. I am joined today by Tani of American Hunters and Anglers. Lan, would you like to introduce yourself? I know you're a OG on here, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm coming to you live from Missoula, Montana. And this is where I grew up, is in Montana, and I've had the great pleasure to travel all across the country, but Montana is still my home, and I've been working in conservation for 25 years, and this new entity, American Hunters and Anglers, is just that latest iteration.
All right. You were formerly with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Yep.
You were there for how long?
There for a decade.
I would say I almost said like a decade, but being a smartass, but and I know you parted ways with there, and you started a new one. We can touch a little bit into that, but
sure.
You want to give us a little bit of background for like my listeners that haven't listened to like the OG podcast?
Yeah, so I mean, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers was one of the greatest joys of my life, and I loved working with volunteers all across the country. I loved kind of working with the staff. But when I first started, I was the first full-time employee, and we grew to 40 full-time employees. I was traveling 2 to 3 times a month, which again, I loved meeting people. I loved seeing new places, but that was a lot of, I would say, pressure on myself, but also my family that I was leaving behind. And so, I made a decision to step back from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, really to kind of, get my shit back together and to hang out with my family more. My kids, my daughter this year is a senior in high school. My son is a freshman, and they're going to be out of the house before I know it. And wanted to, hang out with them, wanted to reconnect with my wife. And so after I left Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, I took a year off, which I'm very thankful for. Was able to kind of step back and again, be with my family, get outdoors. I did a ton of trips with my kids, I did a ton of trips with friends, and just kind of everyday things also just around, here in Montana, where we have a plethora of opportunities, thanks to public lands and public waters.
And
but
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll say my my questions. I'm thinking in my head, because you don't make a product, but you sort of do. So I'm trying to reword them to work for this podcast. But you hit nail on the head. My next question I have: what is the biggest thing you've battled and won on for public lands?
That is a great question. I'm not going to be able to maybe narrow it down to one, but I think that I'm real proud of kind of the work that I did when I worked for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership.
Okay.
And at that point, we passed a thing called Open Fields out in Congress, so in the Senate and the House, and ultimately signed by the president as part of the Farm Bill.
Okay, which president do you remember?
Oh, God, so that was back in, 2000, so...
Was it Bush?
I think that was Bush. Yep. Yeah, W. And I think that we're right, so he's probably going to correct this as listening to this, but that basically was public access to private land. We have a great program here in Montana called block management, but there was a lot of, opportunity around the country, and so what this basically did is it gave money to states to help start public access to private land programs.
All right.
And so now there's a ton of them all across the country because of this program. They basically work, you get some federal funds and match that with state funds. So that one was when I was working at TRCP, was, one of my favorites. Then I went to work for the National Wildlife Federation. I did all sorts of stuff there, but the thing I'm most proud of is that when the oil spill happened down off the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, Deep Horizon, and it was super tragic. It killed 18 people.
Yeah.
But with all that oil that spilled out, if you remember, the smoke's coming out, but then there's all that oil for days. They couldn't cap that well for days. So all that oil had major damage, to the Gulf, and what happens there is that you have those Clean Water Act penalties that are assessed because of that big, I guess, oil spill. That all goes into the general treasury. And we've been working on the Mississippi River Delta for a long time. That resource has been disappearing. The land has been disappearing of that marsh for, since the 1930s. And so this created an opportunity to say, hey, we think those Clean Water Act penalties should go back to, the place where they impacted, but also help, restore the Mississippi River Delta, which is, one of the, I think they went through 70% of the waterfowl in this country.
Yeah.
And so ultimately worked on a bill called the Restore Act. I won't give you all the details, but, Senator Baucus from Montana was chair of the Finance Committee. Senator Landrieu was from Louisiana. They didn't really like each other. We knew people on both sides, and so we brought them together. And through the transportation bill, that bill was actually added. And we got $18 billion for conservation from those Clean Water Act funds. And so that money is now being put to work down in Louisiana and other coastal states to really help clean up that mess, but also restore the Mississippi River Delta. So that's two. And then the third, I guess I would say in kind of like a combo, I think that the pushback from the sale of public lands that happened with Congressman Chaffetz back in 2017.
Yeah.
When I was working for BHA, that was a ton of fun, man.
Was he from Utah? He introduced, or no?
He was from Utah. He's from Utah. Yeah, and so he introduced that bill like on a Tuesday. This is right when like Facebook Live was starting to happen. We went up at BHA with like a Facebook Live, talked about it. It ended up kind of going viral, if that's the word we can use. And then, Stephen Ranella picked it up. Joe Rogan picked it up. Joe Rogan was wearing, our BHA shirt that said public landowner.
Oh,
and ultimately, yeah, they're rad, right?
Yeah.
And I think that ultimately Congressman Chaffetz pulled back his support for that bill. Like, he was the one that introduced it. He pulled back like a week later. And when he did that, he was holding like this dog that was a borrowed dog that didn't hunt. He was wearing all brand new clothes, like brand new camel clothes. So he's not a hunter himself, really.
Yeah.
He's holding his dog. He's like, I heard the people. Like, I will not, pull my support for this bill. And so that was, I think the flex of just the average, everyday American citizen that happened there. Then including people again like Stephen Ranella and Joe Rogan and others. That was pretty freaking awesome. And, we just did it again this last spring, early summer, when another, elected leader from Utah, Senator Mike Lee, tried to sell 3 million acres again, and he got his ass handed to him again. And that to me, when the people rise up and they demand things, man, that's a fun thing to be a part of, and it's the way that democracy should work in this country. So you asked for one, and I gave you three.
Hey, that works. That's we're great minds think alike. And if they get an inch, they're going to take a mile. And
absolutely.
It's opening the door. It's like, I told one of my friends that was like on the fence about, they need to sell, if they sell this public land because like the Bureau of Land Management can't do this or do that. I said, dude, what's next? I said, that's opening the floodgates. What's next? It could be Yellowstone. It could be Glacier. It could be this. It could be that. Because they're all these places have rich in minerals and timber, and it's the almighty dollar.
Totally. And I think, the mantra for that campaign became not 1 acre, right?
Yep.
And I think that, for me, we should still have development of our natural resources on our public lands, but those belong to all of us. And so you can do that development at the same time. You can, do that in one place, and in other places you can still have that access for hunting and fishing. And so it's like this idea of multiple use, and it's a very sticky, kind of tricky thing to do. But if we give it away, we never get it back, right? Like, we never get it back. And to me, that's what's uniquely American. Is that just like that T-shirt, man? Like, this public land belongs to everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent. Doesn't matter how much money's in your bank account. Doesn't matter, who your parents are. Like, it belongs to all of us, and that is uniquely American and super special, and something that we need to hold on to.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, boundary waters. I thought this whole mining thing was done. I've been to Boundary Waters
Yeah,
twice. It is, I would say, probably the uh the jewel of the north. That's what I put it as because when you enter that canoe area and you get off the access lakes, that water turns crystal clear.
yeah.
And I've I've caught tons of fish up there. My goal is to go deer hunting up there by canoe one of these days, but let's see if my body will let me do that. So you want to touch on that subject?
Yeah, and I'm on the eve almost of going up there. I'm going again here in a couple of days for my fourth time. And the Boundary Waters is just this, it's 1.1 million acres established in 1964. That's when the Wilderness Act was passed. So this is one of the first wildernesses. Ever since it was established, it is the most visited wilderness in this country. And the reason it is because that access is pretty easy, right? Like
Yeah.
all the way from 5-year-olds to 95-year-olds can get in there because you can get in a canoe, you can go across this lake. Sure, the portages, you got to get out of the canoe. But if you got somebody to carry it for you, that 5-year-old's not probably going to be carrying a canoe or that 95-year-old. But then you can just go to the next lake and you can paddle and you can be in there. And it's like, it's unbelievable. You've been up there.
Yeah.
And like you said, that water is so crystal clear. You can actually drink it right out of the lake, which I've done. But it's like been this political football a little bit. I think that there's a huge outdoor economy that is based on the Boundary Waters. Again, it's the most visited wilderness in the country. But there's also a foreign-owned, like the Chilean mining company that has rights that are just south of the Boundary Waters. So it's like a quarter mile south of the Boundary Waters is in the Rainy Lake watershed where, it's south of the Boundary Waters, but all that water flows north up into the Hudson Bay. And so, having a mine on that quarter mile south
ain't any good.
Ain't good. And like there's never been a copper sulfide mine that hasn't leached toxic like shit. And so it's like you don't want to put that. Go ahead.
Rainy Lake has a bunch of outfitters on it. Resorts, lodges.
Totally.
What are they saying about this?
Oh, they're up in arms.
Okay.
I think that that like this clean water, is so important. And so, I think that just to step back a little bit, there's been this proposed mine, then during the Obama administration, and then it was, there was a moratorium on this mine, and let's take a pause. Then in Trump won, like it kind of came back into fruition. Then during Biden, it kind of slipped out again, and now again under Trump, they're trying to fast track this, and what makes no sense to me is that, again, this is a foreign-owned company. Besides it being a copper sulfide mine, like any kind of copper sulfide mine should not go in there. Yeah. But it's foreign-owned, too. So we're willing to risk, like, one of the crown jewels of the entire public land system, which is the Boundary Waters. And like you said, like the best of, like, the Midwest and the North, really, in this country. Like, we're willing to risk that for, a small economic gain for a Chilean-owned mine, right?
Yeah, they're probably. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I would say they're big. They're like their big push. They'll probably create jobs in the area, but how many jobs? Because you're killing jobs. If it has a spill, you lose all your outfitters. You lose lodge owners. You lose this, or maybe that's what they want to do so they can expand their property.
Totally. And so I think that you would gain some jobs, but the amount of jobs and then the sustainable idea of an economy, right, of the outdoor economy. So the outdoor economy in general in the United States generates $1 trillion a year in this country. And the cornerstone of that is public lands, just like the Boundary Waters. And that is sustainable, and it's also something that you can probably grow as you care and feed it. But like we said, like if there's a spill, that would drastically be impacted. Where, will there be some mining jobs? Absolutely. But are those few jobs worth risking the outdoor economy that goes along with the Boundary Waters? And I think that I would say hell no.
And there's heritage sites in the Boundary Waters. Like there's pictographs. It's like almost like 75 feet up on a cliff. And I don't know if it's a river or a lake. I think it's a river. Then you have Council Rock there. I think that's what's called, where like the Voyagers had their meetings and all that stuff. And I guess people don't realize that. I mean, me and you know that. We've been there. But I don't think the vast population knows. They just think it's like a big fishing area and outdoor area.
I mean, it's like you said. I mean, I think it's sacred for Native Americans. You know, they used to harvest a lot of wild rice up there, which I'm sure you've had wild rice. Like,
Yeah.
and this is not like Uncle Ben's wild rice you buy at the store. This is like the good stuff, right? Like the best stuff.
It's not even
So
rice. I don't think. I think it's I think it's a type of grass. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like you might probably know the more details. Where I'm hoping to actually do some of that here when I go up there this trip. I've never done that before. Where you kind of beat it down into the bottom of the canoe, and then you kind of shuck it, and then you'll eat it.
Yeah.
And so I'll report back. That'll be my main question: is this really a rice? And I'll get back to you. But like, yeah, I mean, it's just like it's a sacred place, you know. And I think, you know, to me, it's one of these places that's like it's a cathedral. Like those lakes are kind of like the altars. I would say that like the stars are like the candles that you see in a church, you know, and then like the moon, you know, there is something powerful. I don't know how religious you are or, you know, anybody listening to this, but when you see that moon, you realize there's something bigger than you.
Yeah.
And you know, and being in that place. And so, you know, again, like I'm not against mining at all, and we need it in this country, but to put a mine quarter mile south of one of the biggest gems just makes no sense to me at all.
Now, a few years back, didn't they want to put a copper mine on up in Alaska, like on one of the biggest salmon runs in the world?
Yeah, so that's Bristol Bay.
Yeah.
That's Bristol Bay.
Is that the same type of mine they want to do?
I mean, it's similar, right? That one they were going to have like the largest earthen dam in the world, and it was in the most seismic active area too, right? So they have earthquakes up there all the time, and they wanted to put this mine on the top of this drainage where that is like the last remaining kind of major salmon runs, and you know, ultimately, I think people should know the stories. I think that, you know, there was a lot of my friends who helped put a campaign together up there that brought together outfitters, brought together the native people that have lived up there for, you know, eons, brought together like companies, like outdoor companies from all over this country to save Bristol Bay. So this huge kind of like, you know, outreach effort that, you know, you'd see Save Bristol Bay or no Pebble Mine. It was Pebble Mine. You'd see stickers like in Florida, no Pebble Mine. Like it was like awesome to see. But then ultimately, Don Trump Jr. went up there and went fishing. And he was like, oh my God, this is like an amazing place. And so the Trump administration, when this stuff was proposed, his mind was kind of, you know, being pushed forward during the first Trump administration. Don Jr. stood up and he was like, man, this is not the place to do that. And ultimately that thing got squashed. It's not over yet, I would say, up there. Things are never really done. You know, we win these battles, but the war is never done. Okay. But at this moment, Bristol Bay seems to be pretty safe.
I'm trying to figure out what other topics, what other big news topics that
we talked about the sale of public. We talked about the sale of public lands. You know, I think the big one that's in front of us right now is roadless lands. So, roadless lands are Forest Service lands. They've been around since 2001. So that was actually Clinton. So maybe I'm going back to my thing and trying to figure out when Clinton was in presidency. So maybe that first piece about the.
I could do this. George Bush W. got elected in fall of 2001. Because that was my senior year in high school because I had that in government class. So Clinton,
look at you.
Yeah, Clinton was he just a one-term president or two-term president?
Two terms.
Yeah. So after before that.
Yeah, so it must have been right as Clinton was leaving. So, I think there had been this idea. So, national forests, they're available to us all. I think don't quote me on this, but I think it's 150 million acres that are in this country. Yeah. And, majority of that is multiple use. And when I say multiple use, all sorts of different things, hunting, fishing, running cows, doing timber harvest, doing oil and gas development, doing, mining that we just talked about. But then these roadless areas were these places that it was just rugged country. The timber value wasn't as high. Since it was rugged country, the road building would be super expensive to get in there. So they really had never been touched when the rest of the national forests had.
Yeah.
And so they established this thing called the Roadless Rule back in 2001, so right before Clinton left. And, with a lot of input from people on the ground. And that's stood the test of time since then. And these roadless lands, they provide, they're amazing for elk security.
Yeah.
Elk need these places where there aren't roads. I think that biologists have done, studies that, that elk security is at least a mile from any road. And so a lot of places that are national forests, there's just not those areas. But these roadless lands there are. They also provide, this kind of filter for clean water. And so, like, in my home state of Montana, that's super important to trout. But, like, up in Alaska on the Tongass National Forest, which is, this amazing, it's the largest national forest in this country. Like, that's for the 5 different species of salmon. Like, that's still got 5 different species of salmon that are, that are living in that kind of, like, I would say, Tongass National Forest watershed. And so these lands have been awesome and, have provided a lot of opportunity. And I would say still are in that multiple use. You can still run cows on roadless lands. You can still go do plenty of activities there, just not, like, punching in roads or harvesting timber unless that timber harvest is kind of reducing fire.
I don't mean to cut you off. Did they want to put a road in? Oh, Steve Renella talked about this. They want to put a road in from somewhere in Alaska where you used to, like, have to fly into.
Yeah, so that's in northern Alaska, and that's called the Ander Road, so that's separate.
Okay.
And that's actually been stopped in a lot of ways for now. It was taken out of the same place where they was trying to sell public lands. They were trying to promote that Ambler Road, and then it got taken out, which is good. But they're also trying to figure out administratively if they can do that. But back to the roadless, so now they're proposing to undo the roadless rule and to open it up to building roads and development. And I'm going to say a couple of things about that. First, our overall management of our federally managed public lands, that's been going, like, the budgets have been going down for 3 decades. And so that counts Republicans, that counts Democrats. Like, we have seen the management of our federal lands as less a priority in this country. And that's a whole huge topic we could talk about, but, like, that is just fact. And so we don't have the money to maintain the roads that we have now, right? Yeah. So now you want to go punch in new roads, which makes zero sense to me, like, when you can't even take care of the house that you have right now. The second piece of that is they're saying that, this is about, management of these forests and fires, and what they've shown is when you put in roads somewhere, there's more fires there because there's more people there, right? And so and so there's that piece, and then the other piece of that is that you punch roads in into these areas, pretty pristine. They're not wilderness, but they're pretty darn pristine. And you put those roads in there, well, that comes with that is noxious weeds. Like, noxious weeds are going to be a fact because of you're putting that stuff in there, which one makes them more prone to fire, but also displaces native species, which are important to wildlife. And so there's many reasons not to do this. I think that first one I said, though, like, this is not fiscally responsible because we don't have the money to manage the existing road system that we have. And so let's start doing that and think about how we get more timber off our existing lands versus going into these roadless lands, which again are super rugged.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. We don't have the money to do our own infrastructure here, but yet they want to put brand new roads in. Well, they're probably hoping some corporation to come in and back it all, so they make money up front and make money on the back end. And I don't know if I'm right.
My theory, Justin, is that, like, so we were talking about the scale of public lands earlier. Mike Lee, who gets a bunch of money from Blackstone, which is like this huge, like, development company. They do real estate all over this country. We killed that because, the people were aware. This idea that roadless lands and punching in roads are expensive to build. Have the federal government go build those roads and then start selling little piece here and a little piece there to develop them for, like, people to have these little big mansions. That's where I think some of this is going, besides the fact of, like, they're going to try to, go in and really, harvest resources, that is a short-term gain for what they're providing for us, in the long term.
I 100% agree with you. All right. Oh, now what else? Oh, someone else going to ask you while we're on that. And it's not just one side or the other. and doesn't matter what sitting president there is, because both, I'll say every president's came up with dumb ideas for public lands, right? Or is it just more than one side or the other? But the president has nothing to do with it. It's more Congress and the Senate, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I would say is that I talked about these budgets overall. Yeah, it has definitely been, through Democratic and Republican presidents that budget has gone down. Now, the budget is only proposed by the president. Who actually passes the budget is Congress. So that's the Senate and the House. And so it doesn't matter, but at the end of the day, who Democrats or Republicans, but at the end of the day, the management of our public lands has become less of a priority. Now, I will say that on our public lands, the only people that are proposing to sell public lands are Republicans, and they happen to become mostly from Utah, right? I think
there's got to be something in the water in Utah. Yes,
maybe so, maybe not. But I think, what I think that they really want to privatize down there because they're running out of they want to build more. And, I think they want to build more of they want to have more opportunity for wealthy individuals to buy pieces of property down in Utah in particular, as they try to expand kind of the empire that they have. So
I would say, what do they do? Want to make their own Jackson Hole?
I mean, I think that, I don't want this to sound any other way, but it may come across this way. But, the Mormon church is a very pretty new religion, and they're based in Utah. That's where they kind of settled. And they got the public land, and they got a lot of money, and they're growing exponentially, and they want to, instead of building infrastructure internally, they want to extend that out. So I think, a major driver of this is the Mormon church. And again, I have nothing against the Mormon church. When I coached high school soccer, I had a lot of girls that played for me that were Mormons and are absolutely amazing individuals, and their families were amazing. And I'm talking about more their leadership that is trying to get rid of public lands. And just another example of that would be the governor of Utah, who petitioned the Supreme Court to steal 18 million acres of Bureau of Land Management land, and give it to the states, which is, you gave it to the states, that's just a short term, before it gets transferred to private. And went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court told them to go pound sand. But again, that came out of Utah. And I think, it's hard not to draw those conclusions that I did. I think that people within the Mormon church need to step up who enjoy their public lands and tell them to knock it off.
Yeah. But they've been, I'm not talking crap about the Mormons, but they did that when they first found in Utah. They were they were claiming land that wasn't theirs and chasing anybody out that wanted land. So
it's a long history there for sure.
I guess history repeats itself, just this is in a completely different way.
Yep.
Oh, what else can we talk? We really touched on.
I think. Here's something I want to tell you that we haven't really touched on. So, we've been talking about issues.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to go up to 40,000 feet and look at this overall.
Okay. So that works.
There's this idea of dismantling our public lands, defunding our public lands, and then ultimately divesting. And divesting is just a fancy word for sell it the F off.
Yep.
And so the dismantling can be, the dozing that happened, right? Earlier in the year, you had February 14th, what do they call it? Something massacre, the federal massacre. But you have all these federal employees that were cut. Then you had 5,000 more that took early retirement because they saw it was coming.
Yeah.
And these are agencies that were already understaffed and under budget, as we talked about before. And so now you're putting even more pressure on these areas. And you talk, the other part of the dismantling would be, I think the stuff we've talked about, the Ambler Road up in Alaska, or the roadless rule being rescinded, and the Tongass, or, you're talking about the boundary waters and the mine up there. They're dismantling these public lands, defunding these public lands, so they ultimately can divest them. And I think I'm not, I don't want to sound like conspiracy theory, but these things are happening. They're trying to make it so we're nah, man, the management of our public lands isn't very good. Maybe we should divest them. Maybe we should sell them. And that, to me, would be the ultimate, travesty that, we are not able to gift our children or the next, generations in front of us the existing things that we have now, which is the envy of the world, right? And people want to privatize it either for their own private playgrounds or they want to, be able to make more money in their own way off of that, where instead of working within the system, where they have to follow rules and they have to think about this multiple use, not the development everywhere in every place, that, they want to get away from that. And that to me, is just short-sighted and really, when Theodore Roosevelt really started this legacy for us, he talked about conservation as the best use for the most people for the longest amount of time. And when I hear, stuff like, energy domination, which is being talked about a lot. I'm down with energy security, and we can do that right now. We're one of the biggest producers of energy in this world.
Yeah.
And that means that we can, take care of ourselves. But what we're doing right now is we're exporting the shit out of that energy. So that's not about energy security. That's about this idea of energy domination. And domination, just that word in general, means somebody is losing. But that means that a few people are making a lot of money, and we, the American people, are losing. Versus that idea of conservation is how do we make this sustainable and so it's the best use for the most people for the longest amount of time. And I think that is something we need to get back to. And I think that is, an ideal that's shared by the majority of Americans, no matter, whether you call yourself a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent.
I got a great example of that energy issue. Okay.
Yeah. We
have a nuclear plant that supplied my area with nuclear power. It got, because they have a date on them, and it got outdated, so Commonwealth Edison sold it to a different company. Well, Commonwealth Edison buys the electricity from that plant and sells it to us. So my electric bill in the summertime used to be maybe $280 on the high side, because I had AC running all the time. Now this summer, it was $680 a month. And what are we supposed to do? Am I not supposed to run electricity? I have to.
Right. So,
and it's just not here. It's everywhere.
Energy is, it's a thing that, that we all need. And I think part of that, too, is that, you got one provider. In my home state, we got one energy provider.
Same here.
So, they got a corner on the market, right? There's no, there's no market to kind of drive that down. And so I think, regulations on that, especially at a state level, are super important.
All right. What is American hunters and anglers almost a hashtag or motto say their motto. Do you have a motto for it yet or no?
I think that I want to tell you kind of just what American Hunters and Anglers is first, maybe, give a little more detail to it. So, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Trout Unlimited, the Elk Foundation, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, all amazing organizations that do a lot of stuff on the ground. And then they work on policy as well. Yeah. But they're all designated under the IRS as 501c3s. And what that means is it puts restrictions on them. It says they cannot lobby, and that means that lobbying can be at Washington, D.C., actually face-to-face, or that lobbying can be asking people to do things for you. That's called grassroots lobbying, but they both count as the same. And so they can only do that 20% of their budget.
Okay.
So you have a budget of $1 million, and they spend $200 on lobbying. Yeah. The other piece for C3s is that you cannot get involved in elections at all. And, I think that a lot of these conversations that we're talking about happen at the ballot box. But I think that, we, the people, need to make our issues, public land, public waters, public wildlife issues, more in that radical middle, or somebody the other day described it to me as this movable middle.
Yeah.
And so, let's make sure that anybody that's running for political office, this is a main ideal for them, right? I'm sure we can dicker around a little bit in that radical middle or that movable middle on what that really means, but let's not get on the far left, let's not get on the far right. Yeah. And so But if you don't get involved in elections, that's kind of hard to do, right? Like you can ask them through grassroots lobbying, but again, it's only 20% of your overall budget. You have limitations. And so I've always wanted to start a national C4.
Okay.
I'll explain what that is here in a second, because I knew that like there was opportunities to really, do that at a better level. And so with a C4, which American Hunters and Anglers is, there's zero limit on lobbying, so we can do it 100% of the time. And I've had this job now for 7 months.
Okay.
And I've been out to DC twice. Right, so the direct lobbying that we're doing is not very much, but the grassroots lobbying. So we're on social media every single day, and we're asking people to take action or report in the news on what's going on, because there's so much going on. Sometimes it's hard to even know what's going on, and so that's called grassroots lobbying, and we can do that every single day and not reach a limit. We can do it 100% of the time.
All right.
The other piece then is that we can get involved in elections. And obviously we're not in the election cycle right now. That'll be in 2026. But we plan on playing in 2026. And again, making sure that both Republicans, Democrats, and independents all realize that public lands, public waters, and public wildlife are an American ideal, and do not mess with them. In fact, you should be supporting them. And so that is really what, the difference between a C3 and a C4, but what we are in American Hunters and Anglers. And then going to the tagline, we say we're on the front lines of the war on public lands, front lines for conservation. It is, and I think we have to think about it that way. And it's a war. This is kind of frustrating, Justin, but it's a war that'll never be over. Like when I think about, when Roosevelt, when I talked about that word conservation, and when he was president, he set aside our first national forest land. He called them forest reserves. He didn't set them aside to never have any kind of extraction on them, or timber cutting is what it was at that point. But again, he said we need to make this sustainable. And so let's not just like mow down the forest for a short-term gain. Let's do this, so we can sustain it. And so, to me, again, that is kind of like, there was threats back then. There's been threats ever since then. The history of conservation in this country, every single time there's a threat, the people kind of step up and positive things come out of that. And so right now, this war just continues. We happen to be in it right now. But unfortunately, I'm 50 years old. When I'm dead and gone in 50 years, which I hope I don't make it to 100, to be totally honest. But if I'm around, other people are going to be having the same conversation that you and I are having right now. And I guarantee you, as the population builds in the United States, that this conversation about these infinite, there's like finite resources, not infinite, but finite resources, but infinite, I would say, opportunities, has become much more important every single year that we go forward, because clean air, clean water, the ability to hunt and fish and recreate on our public lands, pretty much for free. Like all those things are going to become, like the pressures are going to continue to privatize them. And so, this war will never be over, but it's kind of fun to be in the middle of it.
I 100% agree with you on this. I would say I know you follow a lot of news articles and political stuff. Like here in Illinois, I know you're more out. We have public lands here, but nothing like out west. We have Shawnee National Forest, and we have state public lands too. Well, back in January or December, late December of last year, or early January of this year, there was a bill that was passed, signed into law, that they're giving Shabnaw Lake and the area that's in it was a state park, back to the Potawatomi people. And there's like people are up in arms about it and all this stuff. I said, okay. One of my friends, who he works for I4, or he's an I4 representative. I don't know if you know what that is. It's like sort of like what you do, but it's for like hunters rights and anglers' rights, and keeping everybody
in Illinois.
Yeah, keeping everything in check on both sides of the fence. And I have to get him on it because I really don't know much about it. But he was up in arms. He goes, "Well, what about all this money and all this?" I went there. I said, "Do you realize if you read the treaty that got us this land, like we screwed them over. I said, we flooded their cemetery pretty much and built a damn lake there. And it's going to stay open to the public, but it might be, I wonder if it should be managed a little bit better than it is, because it gets a lot of hunting pressure and it gets a lot of fishing pressure because it's an hour away from Chicago and it's an hour away from Rockford, and it has muskies in it, which yeah, they're fun to catch, but you can't, I mean, it's frowned upon if you eat them. But, yeah, I don't know if you heard anything about that or got wind of it or anything like that.
I haven't heard of that, but I would say that I think this topic that you're bringing up is happening all over the country, and I think that like you said, like treaty rights, which have been ignored and or thrown away in so many instances. Like now, I think tribes and Native Americans are starting to think about like those treaty rights and how do they exercise them. And I think that one of the things that we've been talking about, and I'm not saying that American hunters and anglers, I would say we as just like this collective we of hunters and anglers, is how do you take advantage of like I think it's called like traditional ecological knowledge, that Native Americans have had for living, near these places for thousands and thousands of years. How do you combine that with like modern kind of science as well, right? Modern wildlife biology science or modern soil science or modern whatever. And I think like this term has kind of come up as like the shared stewardship. And so at this point with that shared stewardship, you're kind of combining those two things to kind of come out with the best outcomes. And to me, moving forward, I think that's an awesome solution because I think we can learn a ton from folks that were here. I'm fifth generation Montanan, but when I say that, to my travel friends, they're like, "Oh, that's great! Like we've been around, for tens of thousands of years." So I'm like, got it. But I think there's a lot to learn on both sides, and it's also, Justin, it's also a path forward, right?
Yeah.
I think that, and so that idea of shared stewardship is one that I think people should be thinking about. And, in these situations, I don't know the exact situation in Illinois, but I'm thinking about stuff that, that I'm more familiar with. And I think that is a path forward and ultimately, will help us, instead of, it goes this way and then goes that way, it goes this way and goes that way. It'll be much more steady going forward, I would say.
I watched, I think it was a podcast with Steve Rinella, and he had people on there from, also the Wind River Reservation. Like I think
they're bringing bison back, dude.
Yeah, and you can fish on the Shoshone Wind River Reservation, but you can't hunt it. Which that brings a whole economic thing in for them. It's their land; they want to save the resources for them. I get it because I'm talking to the choir because you've been through reservations. You know how poor they are. The deeper in the poor. When we were going to Yellowstone, we went through the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. Then we went to the Crow Reservation, and man, it's like some place in there. It's like a third world country. And then you're out the other side, and I don't think people know about it. I guess a lot of people think they just own casinos and stuff like that. And man, why did those people so wrong?
Yeah, I think the TV show Yellowstone, wasn't great for that in particular. But again, like I think that like working together, and figuring out, I think, I talked about the bison restoration that's happened on the Wind River. There's bison restoration that's happened on the Blackfoot tribe here in Montana. That's happening, in other tribes here in Montana, and that, that idea of bringing back, this iconic species that was so important to Native Americans, but also is our national mammal, right?
Yeah.
Like it's our national mammal, and bringing that species back, which, is such an important piece, I think, to heritage, such an important piece to their culture, such an important piece to just like the land, really. Like, bison really drive kind of that ecological system. And so that is one, I think, again, that we can all work together on, and ultimately, have that shared stewardship. And so that not only, to tribes get to, harvest these bison, but so do non-tribal members, right? And I think that, like whatever those numbers are, and I don't know exactly, like, is that they get 10 and we get 1 or 10 and 2, whatever it is, like whatever those numbers would ever be. But again, it's like this shared resource, shared stewardship, and so we find a path forward. So, that's my piece about that conversation, and I think it's a huge, when you think about my old mentor Jim Posowitz would talk about this, and he said, we have built a pyramid of conservation restoration in this country that is unbelievable.
Yeah.
We almost wiped birds off of this country because women were putting feathers in hats. We had like there was hardly any turkeys. The duck populations in the 30s were in huge trouble. The elk populations were down. Now you have, this huge success story, which is the North American wildlife conservation model. And you've brought back all these species, these iconic species, but you have one that you have not done yet, and that is bison. And he always called it the capstone. Like, think about that pyramid, that very top piece of the pyramid, call that the capstone. That would be the capstone on this kind of on this conservation restoration story in North America and in the United States in particular. And how rad would it be to be a part of that? And, it's something that we still can do that is in the grass. And I think working with tribes is going to be an essential piece of that.
We have bison here in Illinois in Nagusa grasslands, and it's a tall grass prairie, but it's all, it's fenced off to keep them in, obviously. But I want to say it's like 300, 400 acres, which is not, that's just not even a drop in a bucket.
Right.
But if you like see what they did to the ecosystem, and like there's grass like there that is like nowhere else in northern Illinois.
Yep.
And it's great. Oh.
When you talk about grasslands, that's the number one endangered biotype in the entire world, but also in the United States.
Yeah.
And so, besides bringing bison back, and they'd be fun to look at, and they kind of drive that ecological system, but they also need kind of not 400 acres. They need big areas to roam, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you
80 to 100 bison? It's probably more than that. More acres than that. I'll have to give you the info and text it to you. And they have obviously they have calves. Those calves go off to. They breed them there. Those calves go off to help restart another population. So who knows? Maybe some of those calves will end up in the Wind River.
Yeah, maybe. I think there's bison restoration gets fascinating really quick, right? They're looking for pure strains, that have no kind of cattle in them, and there's very few places that have that. But it's also, again, this ecological kind of driver. And I think in our lifetime we'll see major bison restoration, and I think that'll be driven by the tribes. But also, we talk about these public lands. These are the places where you can put those bison back because, in many places in the country, we have large enough areas to put these bison back.
Look at elk. Look at elk.
Yeah, totally.
East. Totally. I'm 30 minutes away from Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a decent, nothing compared to out west, but they have a decent elk herd now. Well, last year we had elk crossing the border in Illinois.
Yeah, that's sick. That is awesome. But my dad used to work for the Elk Foundation. My dad was the first lawyer for the Elk Foundation when they started here in Montana, and then he was their lawyer until he passed away in 1995. But one of the things that I remember him talking about when I was a younger kid was the restoration of elk, outside of kind of the West. And at that point, they were working with, he would go to, I remember this because he would bring back Hershey bars. He was going to Hershey, Pennsylvania, and they, were restoring elk populations in Pennsylvania. And I think they now have an elk hunt in Pennsylvania for those elk, which is what an awesome success story, right? And so I think, as we talk about these species, there's still opportunities to bring them back. And bison, we should be thinking about that.
Yeah, but we're hitting that 50-minute mark. I don't mean to cut you short. Yeah. Is there anything that you just want to touch on real quick?
I think one thing we haven't talked about yet, I kind of said it a little bit around the sale of public lands, but a lot of people in this country don't think their voice matters anymore. And that is true if you don't use it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that again, what we all prove, and I say we collectively across the country, hunters, anglers, other outdoor recreation folks, ranchers, we came together and said, no, you're not going to sell our public lands. And we wagged the dog. The people wagged the dog, and that's because we stood up and we said something about it, and that was universally felt. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, anybody was saying, don't sell our public lands. And so we, the people, democracy still works in this country, but, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so we really got to make noise. And so when you think that your voice doesn't count, there's a few things you can do, I think there's a lot of organizations, that'll help you send emails out to Congress, which I think is, like the first step. I would say talking to elected leaders that is not as effective. The next effective would be a phone call.
Yeah.
Phone calls are super effective, and that phone number, just the switchboard, is 202-224-3121. That's ingrained in my head. That people you can get a hold of your senator or your congressman. But then the other piece, they used to hold a lot of town halls, and a lot of elected leaders aren't doing town halls anymore.
Is it because they're
the biggest town?
And
I think so.
I think they're afraid on both sides of the fence. And I'm not talking about like acts of violence or anything like that. I just think they don't want the feedback.
I think you're exactly right. And so what I was going to say is that, I think you're exactly right. But then there's this forum called social media, which is like a gigantic town hall, right? And so, I think if folks, when you hear something that you don't like, send them either, DMs is one thing. But the town hall part of this is that on their pages, you can go and be respectful, but you can be like, hey man, don't sell public lands, or hey, we need to keep these roadless lands on their page, make a comment so they see it. Their chief of staff is definitely going to see that if they don't as elected leaders, but their chief of staff will. Yeah. And then you can be doing your own posts, social media. It's called social media for a reason, because when you put up a post, let's say that you care about the roadless lands, or you care about the budgets. Budgets is not quite as sexy as roadless lands, but it's important. But you can do your own post and then tag your senators in that, or your representatives in that, and that is a way for this town hall to happen, because then your friends see it, and and then they see it. And be respectful, I think don't cross that line, no violence, and, don't threaten them and those kind of things. But I think being direct is really important. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do at American Hunters and Anglers in particular, is really activate people on social media, because that's, more than half the people in this country, that's where they're taking their news. And so learn about it and then get off your ass and do something about it. So that's what I kind of like to leave people with, is that, we're either at the table or we're on the menu. And
okay.
If we're not at the table trying to decide what we are going to eat and how it's going to be distributed, and we're going to be on the menu. And so let's change that paradigm. Let's be at the table. And one of the ways you can do that is on social media. And I don't love social media. It's not my thing that I love, but it's also a place where you can really, I think educate people and spur them to action. And I'll do a small plug for American Hunters Anglers. That's how you find us on Instagram. There's no and. Same thing on Facebook. Our webpage is nolandgrab.com, which is an easy one to remember. And you can come find us out and just stay in touch, and we'll tell you what's going on, and then give you the opportunity to be engaged in this system called democracy, which, again, is the envy of the world and something unique in the world that we should all be proud of.
Now, one more question. And this, do you think Americans have lost most of their common sense?
Yes. I mean, it's a great question, and what a huge loaded question. What we're being controlled by right now, or not controlled is the wrong way to say it. What we're hearing most about in this country is on the far. Yeah. It's on the far left and it's on the far right.
There's nothing in the middle. I mean, I grew up
in the middle.
Yeah. I grew up in a union household, so yes, I'm more democratic. But man, I hunt. I own firearms. I own this, and I go to church. And one of my good friends, I'm not going to drop any names on here. He goes, "Oh, you're a Democrat? How can you be a Christian?" I go, "Dude, easy. Same. I can be a Christian when I put a yellow shirt on." And I don't know where your religious views or political views are, but it's like that kind of shit, and it's just not at church everywhere I go.
Yeah.
No.
I think, again, the media in particular, like, loves kind of conflict, right?
Yeah.
So you have the far left and you have the far right, and that's what we hear about. We hear less stories about that. I would call it, again, quote unquote, the radical middle, where I think 80% of this country is, when you have 10% on one side of that far left and 10% on the far right. We're hearing that noise, and we in the middle just need to, like, be louder and demand kind of that common sense that you talked about, right? Like, that is where the majority of people are. And that common sense, sure, there's kind of wiggle room either way on that. But for most of us, like, that's where I am. And I'm like, man, like why are we going to these extremes when the majority of the country is in the middle? And so I just think that we, kind of that maybe it's called like the third way, right? Like instead of the left or the right, it's that third way that's more in the middle, and helps kind of bring this country back to some common sense that you're talking about. And I very much appreciate you for bringing that up.
No problem. I think the lawmakers. This will be the last thing I say. I think the lawmakers behind closed doors are all friends because they're all making money. And I don't know if you feel the same way I do or anything like that. And
here's what I would say about that. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Go ahead. Yeah, tell me what you're going to say.
Well, I think that back in the day, that lawmakers would spar over ideals and policies. But then, like you said, then they go have dinner, or they go out, for a drink, or go for a walk, whatever they do together, because they kind of had shared ideals.
Yeah.
And then they would compromise, Justin. They would be like, all right, you're over here, I'm over here, but to move forward, we got to do this.
Yeah.
And that is called a compromise. Now we live in this day and age where, like, compromise is a dirty word, and people are like, oh, you're giving away this, you're giving away that. And, like, man, like, if I'm hanging out with my friends, if I'm hanging out with my wife, like, I have to compromise for my life to go good, right?
Yeah.
Like my friends aren't going to want to hang out with me if I tell them this is what we're doing every single time we hang out, right? Like, well, maybe we'll do this time. Or, like, let's say it's hunting. Like, we're going to go to that ridge, and, like, okay, we'll go try that out, right? But if I, like, dominate that conversation, they're not going to want to hunt with me anymore. Life is about compromise, and I think that in this era right now, I think that idea of compromise, people hold people accountable, and they're like, ooh, you can't ever compromise. I'm like, well, then how are we going to find a path forward? So I think that's partly what's going on too.
Yeah. People don't want to compromise, and if you don't agree with them, then they unfriend you on social media.
Totally.
Or they say this or say that. Like, the stuff I have friends that are on both sides of the fence, and the whole thing that happened last week. I have one friend says this, another friend says that, and they're all bickering. I said, freaking 3 weeks ago, you guys were best friends. You guys are fighting over this. Yes, it's bad, but it doesn't make him any less human than what he was 2 weeks ago. And I wasn't trying to name drop or anything like that in there.
Yeah. No, here's what I would say is that differences of opinions make us stronger.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that, like, when you surround yourself when everybody thinks exactly the same way, like, that doesn't help you, like, I think grow is the wrong way, but, like, have perspective, maybe is a better way to say that, right? Like, when you're around people that have different thoughts or ideas than you do, and you consider them in a real way, you might not agree with them, but that you can say, I can see where you're coming from, right? And I think so this idea of, like, dialogue and discourse and conversations, like, that just helps us, I think, be a better society versus, like, I am right and you are wrong. Like, I think that, like, we need to have more conversations, again, in that kind of radical middle.
And I will push American hunters and anglers. There's no "and" in there, is there?
They're not on social, just like American Hunters Angler, because that was the handle that we got.
Okay, but reality, there is an "and" in there. So,
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I will push their agenda, push this as much as I can, and I back you guys completely because you guys you're doing the job really that nobody wants to do. if everybody would, I think if it wasn't for groups like you, we wouldn't have public lands at all. It would be like pay to play kind of thing.
Yep.
So, but I will let you go because I know you're a busy dude, and I'll get you back on. It was like November sound, so we can update on the Boundary Waters thing. If anything major jumps off.
Yeah, Justin, anytime, man. And thank you for this opportunity. I think, one last thing I guess I would say, I heard this the other day, is that, we need to be able to communicate in threes. So like 30 seconds, 3 minutes, and this wasn't 3 hours, but it was longer form, right?
Yeah.
So instead of some meme or some 30-second thing that we saw, we were able to have a conversation today. So I just thank you for having me on to this kind of platform where we can have conversations, and hopefully people listen to this with an open mind and think about how they can kind of get into that radical middle, because that ultimately is what we all want to, I think the majority of this country wants to do, get away from this kind of, this side or that side. So thank you again for the opportunity to be on, and it's my pleasure, and I'll do it again anytime you want.
Thank you, man. Have a nice day.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Yep, you too.
Thank you, Midwest Mania guests, for tuning in and listen to my podcast. Remember to check out Compton Traditional Bow Hunters. It's a great organization. Get your kids, family involved. They've been around for a long, long time. Traditions die hard, man, and they're going strong. So thank you and have a nice day. Do what you love. Life is too short. Peace.